Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his cabinet are in Hamilton, Ontario for a caucus retreat. Our Prime Minister is talking about trying to curtail the use of the notwithstanding clause by premiers. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, Trudeau says he's a defender of freedoms. This may drip of a little irony considering how our Prime Minister used the Emergencies Act last winter to those who participated in the Freedom Convoy.
Yeah, he seems to think that invoking the Emergencies Act was not suspending civil liberties. And in fact, he's made that claim. Several cabinet ministers have made that claim. They say that, the Emergencies Act is charter compliant. So civil liberties weren't suspended. And yet you read the Emergencies Act, you read the regulations of what was actually implemented. You couldn't protest at Parliament Hill. You couldn't travel to certain areas. Those are all charter rights being curtailed. There was so much more that the Prime Minister did. Even his vaccine mandate saying you had to be vaccinated to get on a plane, a train, or a boat that went between provinces in Canada. That's an infringement of mobility rights, which are in the charter. But, as I said, he claims that the Emergencies Act is charter compliant. Well, guess what? So is the notwithstanding clause that he wants to curtail the use of. How can I say that? It's in the charter. It's part of the charter. So, his logic doesn't hold, but this is a political move, Hal. He's having his cabinet retreat in Ontario. He's fighting against Doug Ford, not, super hard, but he's trying to remind women voters who are, teachers or educational assistants or nurses in the 905 where he needs to win. Hey, Doug Ford took away your right to strike, but I'm going to protect it. He's not worried about seeming to be hypocritical to convoy protesters whose votes he's not going to get. This is a political trial balloon aimed at those people whose votes he needs and whose votes Pierre Poilievre needs in the next election. That's suburban women.
Brian, it appears as though a record number of people crossed into Canada at Roxham Road last year. What kind of numbers are we really talking about here?
More than 39,000, which, to put it in perspective, that's bigger than the population of Spruce Grove, Alberta. It's bigger than the population of Bradford, Ontario, just north of Toronto. Bigger than the population of Shawinigan. We can go on. It's a significant. We imported a small city into this country through one illegal crossing last year. The second highest month on record since all of this started in January of 2017 was December 2022. I think it was more than 4,600 that crossed in December. The weather's not good. There's a lot of snow. The highest month on record was over 5,500 in August of 2017, when the weather is good, when it's a lot nicer to travel through the woods and across a culvert to come into Canada illegally. But yeah, we are doing a rate of importing people through this illegal border crossing at double the highest previous year. If you took 2017 and 2018, the two highest previous years, and added them together, you wouldn't get as many people as crossed over last year, which is why this is an issue, which is why the Quebec government's calling for it to be closed. A strong majority in Quebec want it closed. And we're finding out things like $94 million spent on hotels booked by the federal government to house the people coming across at Roxham Road.
But why do you say they crossed into our country illegally? Many say there's nothing illegal about this, and these are actually asylum seekers.
Well, there's a big giant sign, several big giant signs at this illegal border crossing saying that it's illegal to cross there. The reason that we get into semantic games is that once you cross over, and by the way, there's the giant signs, plus the RCMP gives verbal warnings. Do not cross here. It is illegal. You will be arrested. And then the people come across, and yes, they're arrested by the RCMP, but then they claim asylum. And once they're on Canadian soil, in Canada, they get to claim asylum. That's why people say, well, they're not illegal immigrants. They're asylum seekers. They came into the country illegally. They're using a loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement, something that has to be fixed. They're economic migrants trying to jump the queue. Most of them don't have their asylum claims accepted. They're rejected as not being legit refugees. That's in the overwhelming majority of cases. So that's why we get into semantic games. Look, this is The reason that I feel that the Trudeau Liberals haven't fixed this problem yet is they want to import yet another American wedge issue. They've done it with abortion, they've done it with guns. Now they want to do it with illegal immigration so that they can turn around and say anybody opposed to Roxham Road is against legal immigration. You find in the United States that there's a strong support for legal immigration among supporters of Democrats and Republicans, but there's not strong support for illegal immigration. But the parties try and, fudge the issue, muddy it up the waters. That's what Trudeau's trying to do here, in my view.
Healthcare is a real hot button topic these days, Brian. There's a lot of chatter about certain provinces moving to use private clinics in their system and calls for the feds to stop it. Apparently, that's not happening. Is there a change in tone in Ottawa?
Yeah, there appears to be. Look, Ontario got the headlines last week, but Ontario is not the first province to move in this direction. Ontario Premier Doug Ford said, we've got a surgical backlog. We've got diagnostic testing backlog. We need to fix this. Our hospitals are at capacity, so we're going to allow 49,000 hours of MRI and CT scan imaging to be done in private clinics. You know what? In Ontario, like in Alberta, if you go for an x-ray, chances are it's in a private clinic already. Alberta does close to 20% of its outpatient surgery in these independent health facilities. Some are not-for-profit, some are for-profit. BC, not quite as high as Alberta, but definitely up there, and that's under an NDP government. So yeah, Ontario's moving in the same direction. And suddenly, people in Ottawa got outraged that Ontario was doing it. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, who represents a British Columbia riding, I've never heard him complain about the NDP government allowing that there. He's never raised the issue about Alberta or Saskatchewan or Quebec, but he got outraged about Doug Ford doing it and said, Trudeau has to stop this, or I'll consider withdrawing my support from the coalition of the clueless. And Trudeau turned around and he didn't say, yes, I'll withdraw, or I'll force Ford to stop. He called it innovation. And he said the provinces are responsible for delivering healthcare. They need to be allowed to innovate. So that's a good sign. We're not going to go towards an American style private medical system, Hal. And you and I being gentlemen of a certain age, we should appreciate that because the medical insurance that we could buy in the private market now would be a heck of a lot more than what we could have bought at 18. So yeah, I'm good with that. But most people don't care how their health care is delivered, just that they pay with their health card, not their credit card, when they go to get the care. And that's what's happening here. And Trudeau says he's okay with that.
And I'm still praying to get a doctor for myself and my family here in Alberta. Such a shortage, Brian. Brian, let's talk international news now. And Poland says it will send German-made tanks to Ukraine, and Germany says they will not block the transfer. Now, is Canada ready to send some tanks as well in Ukraine's efforts to stop the Russian aggression and the war with Russia?
And despite the strong rhetoric from the Trudeau government, no, not yet. And the Prime Minister was asked about this just the other day. He was in Toronto, and someone put the question to him, and he gave a long answer about how strongly Canada supports Ukraine, and that we give more than others. That's not really true. But he wouldn't commit to allowing the tanks to be sent. Now, this is something that we've talked about before, but then said we can't do it because Germany has a veto. They manufacture the tanks, and part of our agreement to purchase them is that we can't sell them or transfer them to another country without say-so of the German government. Not dissimilar to what we do with exports of military products made in this country. It's part of an attempt by responsible governments to make sure that we're not selling to an ally who then turns around and sells it to a warlord somewhere that we are going to be concerned about. So this is a normal thing for Germany to have this veto right. But they're indicating that they're going to waive it for Poland. Of course, they would waive it for Canada. Why would we not immediately say, if we're so fond of this idea, why wouldn't we immediately say, you know what, go ahead? But I'll say this, there's another thing that we could do that we're not doing, Hal, that wouldn't consist of us giving away our military equipment or even our money. The Canadian government, the Bank of Canada, have seized Russian assets. These are not our assets. It's not our tax dollars. We have seized Kremlin-controlled funds of both the government and its supporters that were held in this country. We could turn around and give that cash, much of it in cash, to the Ukrainians to fight against Putin right now. We could do that and it wouldn't cost us, and we're still not doing that. So despite the rhetoric, the actions don't match the words.
Brian, one of Justin Trudeau's allies on the international stage, New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, announced that she's stepping down and not seeking re-election. Her polling numbers were way down, much like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's. Now she's walking away from the public life, but you don't think Trudeau will do the same, considering his numbers?
No, there was some chatter about that last week. Most of the chatter was about how strong of a leader she was and how wonderful, and people saying she, praising her. That's normal when a politician exits, but also because she was a progressive woman, a lot of the chattering classes just were in love with her. Not everyone, and that's part of why she's leaving. In New Zealand, she's far less popular than she was. Her polling numbers are actually worse than Trudeau's, but not that far off. And that, in my view, is the real reason that she's leaving. So will Trudeau follow in her footsteps was the question. And based on his performance, his behavior over the last little while, the answer is no. Late last week, he was in Windsor, Ontario. He was asked about the anniversary of the Freedom Convoy, and he launched into a 5-minute tirade against Pierre Poilievre. This is a man who clearly is re-energized about his job. And by the way, he sees his job as campaigning. I don't think he's a particularly good, at governing. That's not what interests him, but he does like campaigning. And he's good at it. Whether you like him or not, he's won 3 elections for a reason, and he wants to have a fight with Pierre Poilievre. Whether that's a wise move or not, that remains to be seen. I think it'll depend on what the ballot questions are, because I'd say right now that if the ballot questions are the rise in violent crime and the rise in inflation, Pierre Poilievre has a good shot of being prime minister. If Trudeau's able to turn it around into something else, like the accusation he made that Poilievre was racist last week, if he's able to make that the ballot question, then Trudeau may stick around. But he clearly wants a fight. Unlike Ardern, who said she doesn't have gas left in the tank, Trudeau clearly does, and he's hitting the pedal trying to rev this engine up.
You know, Brian, a lot of people would pay to watch Trudeau and Poilievre go at it, mano-a-mano, one-on-one in a debate for 2 hours, solid, but actually answer the questions, Trudeau, not skirt around the issues, but actually answer the questions. I think a lot of people would love to see that. Now, the latest poll from Nanos has the Conservatives with a 7-point lead over the Liberals, but what was interesting, Brian, in that poll is that Canadians apparently prefer Justin Trudeau over Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. How's that possible?
Personal brand and party brand don't always go hand in hand. And at various times, Trudeau has been more popular than his party. At other times, he's been less popular. And so the same's going to happen from time to time for Pierre Poilievre. The same's happened for Doug Ford here in Ontario. The UCP more popular than Jason Kenney was towards the end of his tenure. So, these sorts of things happen. Poilievre's still introducing himself to Canadians, and he needs to continue to talk about the issues that will resonate, that will make them say, okay, you are leading a government in waiting. I will consider switching my vote to you. I keep saying he's got to win the suburban women vote, whether that's in Calgary or Edmonton or Vancouver or Toronto. Those are the people that he's got to win over, because those were the people that gave Trudeau his slight edge in the last election to squeak in. Now, last time the election was won and lost over 2 issues: gun control and COVID response. And I've said it to you before, Trudeau went into lower mainland BC and into suburban Toronto, and he campaigned against Alberta's COVID response because, if you remember, COVID was spiking through the roof. Alberta was having a lot of problems in the hospitals, and he said, if you don't elect me, you'll end up like them. In Alberta, don't do that. It's enough to scare people over. COVID's not going to be an issue. And despite all of his gun control efforts, violent crime's up. Trudeau may not be able to go back to that well. So Poilievre has to speak to issues that matter. And right now, that's the rise in violent crime and the rise in inflation. Just look at your grocery bill next time you're at the store.
Brian, a court ruling last week said Canada must repatriate 4 Canadian citizens held by Kurdish forces in Syria. Brian, these are all men who allegedly went to fight for ISIS. Why do we need to rescue them?
3 of them, I kind of understand the legal reasoning and why the judge is pushing that way. A 4th one, a guy named Jack Letts, nicknamed Jihadi Jack, I don't understand at all, because he's a Canadian of convenience. He's someone who was born in the United Kingdom. He visited Canada as a child with his parents. One of his parents is Canadian, so he has Canadian citizenship that way, but he's never lived here. He has no connection to this country. But the Brits stripped him of his citizenship because he went to go fight for ISIS. I'm sorry, Hal, my parents are from the UK. That'd be like me saying, okay, I need the British government to bail me out of a situation, and I've never lived there. I've only gone to visit family. It's not right. The Kurds have wanted rid of all of these men for quite some time. Many countries have taken their nationals back from the Kurds because the Kurds say, we don't have a jail for them. These people are not our problem. They're yours. The judge's ruling was that the Kurds want to get rid of them. The Canadian government won't give them travel documents. They won't give them passports. They won't give them permission to enter the country, and you're violating their rights. I don't like it, but I'm not shocked that's where the courts went on this. But it is outrageous that it applies to someone who's never lived here and has next to no connection to this country. That is truly outrageous.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Hal.